right? The user experience you get from a device like this, a large part of it stems from the software. And right now, Windows 11 is it's in a bad space.
Is that Microsoft enjoys getting the value from their customers, whereas Valve enjoys delivering value to their customers.
Bill Gates is watching a nightmare unfold as HP drops Windows and shatters the foundation of Microsoft's dominance. The company that helped build the Windows empire is now making it optional, and the shockwaves are brutal. This is a power shift that feels like a full-blown meltdown moment for the Windows legacy.
Forcing onto you so that we can justify the electricity use that it costs to provide this stuff. And like, clearly nobody wants it or else we would have used it, right? This is like, there's everything about this is wrong. Now, I bring this up because from the perspective of people who are interested in this laptop,
when HP's CEO, Enrique Lores, spoke during that January 2025 earnings call, it didn't sound dramatic. There was no shouting, no grand announcement. But what he said quietly changed everything. HP will ship 40% of its consumer laptops with Linux as the default operating system starting in Q3 2025, and if customers want Windows, they will have to request it and pay an extra $75. I need you to understand how massive that is. HP shipped 57 million PCs in 2024. This is not a small brand experimenting to get attention. This is the second largest PC manufacturer in the world deciding that Windows is no longer automatic. For more than 35 years, Windows has been pre-installed on nearly every mainstream PC. That dominance is what built Microsoft into a global empire. It's the system Bill Gates helped turn into the backbone of personal computing. And now, for the first time at this scale, a major manufacturer is saying Windows is optional.
Instead of improving what worked, Microsoft tried to reinvent the wheel and made a square one instead. They threw out the start menu, plastered the screen with tiles, and built an interface that made no sense on a desktop. It wasn't built for users, it was built for metrics, for app installs, for engagement, for control.
What makes this even more shocking is that customers didn't lead this shift. Manufacturers did. Since mid-2022, HP had been quietly evaluating alternatives because Windows 11 was becoming expensive in ways that most people never see. Microsoft's hardware requirements changed the economics completely. TPM 2.0 chips became mandatory. Specific CPU generations were required. That meant a laptop HP could once profitably sell at $349 under Windows 10 suddenly needed to start around $429 just to meet Windows 11 standards.
Because Windows, the operating system, is in such a bad state, I think it has an impact on how we should view all of this hardware to begin with.
When HP's finance team ran the numbers in late 2023, the results were brutal. Microsoft charges between $52 and $68 per Windows Home license, depending on volume. That money leaves HP before the laptop is even assembled. Then there were the hardware costs tied directly to Windows 11 requirements. Those added roughly $34 to $47 per device for TPM chips, better processors, extra RAM, and faster storage.
I'm convinced that Microsoft doesn't care about the end user. They care about B2B. This is where all their money's coming from anyways.
When I looked at the support numbers, that's when it really hit me. Windows laptops generated about 2.3 support calls per device over a 3-year lifecycle, and every single one of those calls cost HP about $18 to resolve. When you add it all up, it comes to roughly $31.50 per laptop in support expenses alone. Then I saw the return rates, and honestly, it was even worse. About 9.7% of Windows 11 laptops were being returned within 30 days. That's nearly 1 in 10 machines coming back. Every return cost HP about $68 in processing and refurbishment. When you spread that across total sales, it averages out to about $6.60 per device. So when I add everything up, the Windows-related burden comes to around $138 per laptop. On devices selling for $400 to $600, that means Windows was eating up close to a third of the revenue. Not profit. Revenue. At that point, the conclusion feels obvious to me. The economics just don't work.
Then came Windows 10, the last version of Windows. It was supposed to fix everything, a service that would evolve forever.
So, HP decided to quietly test something. In March 2024, they listed 40,000 laptops on HP.com with Linux pre-installed, mostly Ubuntu and Pop! OS. There was no big press release and no flashy campaign. If you weren't looking carefully, you might not even notice. The only real difference was the price. These models were $50 to $75 cheaper than their Windows counterparts. And here's the part that surprised even me. They sold out in 11 days. Customer reviews averaged 4.6 stars, compared to 3.8 for similar Windows models. Support calls dropped by 81%. Linux buyers averaged just 0.4 calls per device, while Windows buyers averaged 2.1. The return rate fell from 9.7% to 1.8%. That kind of drop doesn't just look good on a spreadsheet, it changes the entire internal conversation. Suddenly, Linux wasn't a risky experiment. It was a serious business advantage.
Windows actually just publicly states that it believes its users are too stupid to be able to use their product, and that they have to make it even more enclosed and even more restricted. But the thing that makes me just love Valve more and more is the fact that they don't think that about you.
By June 2024, HP expanded the Linux pilot to 12 models. Sales exceeded projections by 340%. By December, Linux machines represented 8% of HP's direct sales volume, and they were the most profitable units in the lineup. Margins were 127% higher than Windows equivalents. A survey of 5,000 Linux buyers showed a 91% satisfaction rate. Customers described the systems as faster, cleaner, and free of bloatware. Many said they preferred the simplicity. When HP looked at shifting 40% of its roughly 22 million annual consumer laptops to Linux, the math became overwhelming. With average savings of around $127 per device, the projected annual improvement was about $1.12 billion. That is not marketing hype. That is straight cost reduction.
Their rapid improvement of Linux and Proton is actually making Linux into a viable competitor to Windows. And that's because Valve recognized a fundamental truth.
Now here's where things get awkward. Microsoft didn't find out about HP's Linux plans from HP. They found out in November 2024 through retailers preparing 2025 product lineups. And Microsoft reacted exactly how you'd expect.
The real death of Windows isn't about software, it was about trust. Microsoft started treating its users like data points instead of customers. Updates broke more than they fixed, and ads appeared in File Explorer.
The first move was money. They offered HP a 30% discount on Windows licensing. That would drop the per-device cost from roughly $52, $68 down to around $36, $48. On paper, that sounds generous. It's basically Microsoft saying, okay, we can talk. But HP didn't blink. Because licensing was never the whole problem. Even if Microsoft cut the fee in half, HP would still be stuck with higher hardware requirements, higher support costs, and higher return rates. The Windows burden wasn't just the sticker price, it was the total cost of ownership. HP had already run the math. Linux still won. So, Microsoft escalated.
So instead of having these one-time year charges, these subscription charges, you're going to have usage charge. Everything you do in Microsoft will be the continuous slow increase of a bill. Because at the end of the day, that's how you make stocks go up.
The second move was leverage. Marketing Development Funds, MDF. That's the cooperative advertising money Microsoft gives OEMs to promote Windows PCs. HP reportedly receives around $240 million annually in MDF. That's not pocket change. The message was clear. Stick with Linux, and that money might disappear. Now here's the part that's almost funny. HP's finance team compared the numbers. Linux shifting 40% of consumer laptops was projected to improve margins by about $1.12 billion annually. So when Microsoft waved $240 million in front of them, HP essentially said, "We appreciate it, but we'll be fine." That's when you know the power dynamic has shifted. When the threat doesn't scare the other side anymore. Microsoft tried a third tactic, contracts. They argued that making Linux the default and charging extra for Windows violated prominent positioning clauses in existing agreements. In other words, Windows was supposed to be front and center, not treated like an optional upgrade. HP's legal team pushed back. Nothing in the agreements required Windows to be the default operating system. Offering multiple OS options was allowed. Charging extra for one of them was not prohibited. So Microsoft threatened contract termination. And here's where the irony hits hard. If Microsoft terminated the agreement, HP could simply stop selling Windows entirely. Linux doesn't require a Microsoft license. The only party that truly loses in that scenario is Microsoft. For the first time in decades, the OEM wasn't cornered. Microsoft was. Eventually, Microsoft backed down. No dramatic press release, no public fight. Just a quiet realization that the old pressure tactics didn't work when the manufacturer had a viable alternative. The leverage had flipped, and the rest of the industry noticed. Dell had already been evaluating Linux internally since mid-2023. They were cautious. No one wants to be the first one through the wall when Microsoft starts pushing back. But HP just absorbed that initial shock. 3 weeks after HP's announcement, Dell's CFO casually stated they were evaluating expanded Linux options for consumer products. That's corporate language. Let me translate it. They're preparing to follow. And then, something even more interesting happens. The psychological grip of default starts to weaken. For decades, Windows dominance wasn't purely about technical superiority. It was about being pre-installed. It was about inertia. When you opened a new laptop, Windows was simply there. But once Windows becomes a $75 optional upgrade, something changes in the customer's mind. They start asking, do I actually need this? The bigger story here isn't Linux winning, it's leverage shifting. For decades, OEMs acted like Windows economics were unavoidable. HP just proved there is another path. Once one major manufacturer breaks ranks and survives, others gain confidence. And just like that, without a dramatic public fight, the balance of power in the PC industry tilted.